is going on, guys? It's Yoji. I always loved melee in PoE, and I've especially been playing the class of skill, which is now called slams, quite a lot in the past. With Earthquake being my most played skill, and the likes of Ground Slam, Tectonic Slam and Consecrated Path being up there as well when it comes to Yoji playtime. From that perspective, I want to give you a review on the slam skill rework that came with this patch. I did bench the Archmage Hierophant for now, because I simply could not wait any longer and finally played some slams and made a Slam Slayer and Harvest trade league while casually speccing into over 300% increased area of effect just to see how fun I could make this. I leveled the character with a mix of skills, trying out the new Earthshatter skill, the reworked Sunder, Ground Slam and Earthquake of course, on a Warcry centric, physical damage impale based and as mentioned area of effect stacking Slayer. I chose Slayer for the leech utility, stun immunity, as well as simply getting some damage. So my review will mostly focus on these new skills that I mentioned before, looking at their viability, how fun I found them while playing, and how much I like their overall design and their place in the current state of PoE. And we will start out with Earthshatter. It has decent AOE coverage, but it's definitely on the low end compared to the other slams. But it does have really high damage, especially when you pop the fissures with a Warcry or using another slam. I also tried putting it on General's Cry, which then let me trigger the spikes with my main slam attack. That does make for a really juicy playstyle that was very fun while leveling. Sadly, General's Cry gets completely disabled by using an explodey chest piece, because that removes any corpses, so you cannot ever summon warriors anymore, unless using Desecrate for example, but I did not feel like shoehorning that into a melee build. General's Cry is a very fun skill though, but for now I'm using the good old War Chief totem instead on my second 6-link. Exploding Earthshatter spikes with Warcries feels very satisfying, even when using it as a main skill. It adds quite a bit of clunkiness and baseline effort to the skill, which in turn does justify the high damage output the skill overall has. I think it is a very strong and satisfying skill to use, and very viable, especially on a low budget or an SSF, because of the very high baseline damage and good AOE coverage without any investment it does provide. And to touch on the whole Warcry mechanic overall, which does tie in with the slams and the two-handed rework, cementing the identity of two-handers as a slow, heavy-hitting, big AOE playstyle. First of all, let me tell you how happy I am that two-handers get to keep their identity and have it reinforced, rather than making it competitive by making it faster and smoother. So more like dual wield for example. I always liked the heavy hitting melee because it felt deliberate, impactful and yes at times a bit heavy and clunky, which is now used as a justification for higher damage output. But feeling the crunch and boom of EQ or Ground Slam with the new graphics and sound, from an audiovisual standpoint the rework is on point in my opinion. However, I felt a bit forced into the Warcries when making my build. Their sheer power level and synergy with the slow hard-hitting playstyle made them really hard to pass up, even if you want to make a different build. And when playing for a prolonged time, the upkeep of the exerted buffs would become a bit tedious and micromanagey at times. But I love the fact that GGG for one did not shy away from actually giving Warcries the numbers to justify casting a non-damage ability in the middle of a pack of mobs. If those Warcry stats would underdeliver, no one would use them. In the past, the developers have been weirdly cautious with giving too much power to melee to make up for its inherent downsides, which I always found weird, so I'm glad to see them finally go a bit more ham on the big numbers for two-handers. Intimidating and Seismic Cry are fantastic slam build enablers and really fun to use, especially during leveling. I decimated bosses during most of the campaign and had a ton of fun pre-casting my buff and slamming the crap out of those bosses. It is weird to me however that the exert mechanic does not work at all with Vaal skills, especially when some of the most fun you can have with Ground Slam and Earthquake is using the Vaal versions. I understand it from a balance point of view, but I believe having exerts have maybe reduced effect on Vaal skills instead of straight up none would have tied in with the playstyle of these beloved slam skills of mine a bit better. On a different note, I think it is a very good thing that GGG did get rid of the Earthquake reduced duration helmet enchant and instead put a node on the tree for reduced duration. I did anoint that node as the positioning is a bit awkward for most melee builds, but it was enough to make EQ feel good while leveling, so I did not miss the enchant at all. Good change. As you can see in the background footage, I scaled the AOE to some pretty ridiculous levels, just for the fun of it. This is by no means an efficient build, and boy, are Ground Slams as well as EQ fun with some fat AOE coverage. Then the next slam skill I tried was the reworked Sunder. My reaction when using it for the first time was something like this. Sunder got reworked into basically a new skill. Even though it always had a less attack speed modifier, people always used to play it on high attack speed dual-wield builds. GGG now reinforces the slow playstyle to the point where the old one doesn't really exist anymore, since Sunder does cancel out previous waves if you attack with it again before it finishes. Maybe they could have kept the old playstyle alive somehow, maybe made the new Sunder a completely new skill and kept the old one. That being said though, I love the new Sunder. It sounds and feels really chunky and meaty. It is incredibly fun to use, as you have to position well and think about where you aim the wave. If you do, you are rewarded with clearing several screens in a single attack. I even set my Atlas up to favorite corridor type maps, which work well for the build, so I can play it to its strength. Open maps don't feel quite as well though. However, to make the clear feel quite a bit nicer, you sadly need a helmet enchant that lets Sunder travel faster. Just after getting rid of the mandatory EQ enchantment, they now introduce an almost as mandatory helmet enchant for Sunder. Come on GGG. Please be a bit more consistent here. I'm not a fan of those mandatory helmet enchants, and I would love to see them gone for all skills. Because this helmet enchant over here makes the Sunder wave travel quite a bit faster, and therefore greatly enhances the clear speed, especially once your character's movement speed gets a bit higher, so you don't outrun your Sunder wave while clearing. And while I do love the Sunder playstyle and clear, you definitely also want an explode mechanic to make Sunder clear packs completely without leaving behind stragglers. With the slow attack speed you will have, you never really want to hit a single mob or two with an attack just to clear the whole pack. One hit has to clear 1 or 2 or even 3 or 4 packs for this playstyle to feel efficient and fun. However, once it does really feel fun. Now for single target, even with solid gear, Sunder is worse than, for example, Earthquake, and especially worse than Earthshatter. Ground Slam is somewhere in the middle. And for all slams, the fact that you have to juggle Warcries while avoiding boss mechanics and getting in your slow hits in between boss attack patterns makes slams not particularly great for prolonged boss fights. Most normal map bosses you can slap with a few attacks and get them to fall over. But for those Conquerors and Siruses and Uber Elders and Shapers, it's quite a bit of work. Unless of course you have strong enough gear to 1 or 2 shot those enemies as well, I guess. But for me that did not detract from the fun of the playstyle too much. And maybe once I spec out of some AOE and get some more defenses and damage as well, that might make the build feel a bit more well-rounded in the end. And lastly, for the weapon base type reworks that came with the two-hander rework this patch in 3.11, I feel like GGG could have done quite a bit more to make the different endgame bases actually feel different while playing. They mainly have a very slight stat difference here and there. I do like that my Corona Mall now has 20% increased AOE, and there are some other bases with some useful stats now. But overall the differences could be more drastic, I feel. I've always been a fan of the Dark Souls-like weapon system, where each weapon type has a very unique feel and a set of moves and use cases with clearly defined weaknesses and strength for every single weapon type. Not sure how well this would do in PoE, but maybe the larger scale item overhaul in PoE 2 will get us closer to that. Talking about overhauls, I recently overhauled the reward tiers and prices of my Patreon page, so if you haven't already, feel free to check those out. Thank you to all my Patreon supporters, subscribe if you are new to this channel. I'm Yoji, and I will see you soon.